from London, this is Channel 2 News.
Good day, and thank you for joining us this morning. I'm Pippa Nightingale.
And from America, I am Ron Burgundy. Filling in for Arthur Buckley, today is June 13th, and we begin our 10 minutes of non-stop news with a look at the top stories from the bottom of the hour.
Before we discuss tonight's top stories regarding the emergence of the Industrial Revolution in Britain, let's recap on its various long-term causes, including colonization, the end of feudalism, Dutch influence in England, the agricultural revolution, and the development of new production methods in response to population growth.
As all of us British remember, the Black Death of the 14th century not only dramatically changed our country socially, but also indirectly led to the end of feudalism. We now consider the end of feudalism as an important long-term cause of up-and-coming industrialization. Additionally, Dutch influence in England following feudalism decline provided the base of our stable investment-fueled economy based on capitalist free market system.
The establishment of European colonies overseas in America was the most memorable news story of the 16th century. Colonization is also thought to have played a significant role as the long-term cause of this new industrial revolution because the colonies quickly became ready markets for European goods, resulting in more capital accumulated from trade.
The 18th century was a revolutionary period of change, and we can only hope that the 19th century is just as productive. The recent agricultural revolution saw a rapid increase in agricultural productivity and a vast improvements in farming technology. The new machines created have since impacted production in farms and factories.
In other news, the miraculous disappearance of the Black Plague has caused a dramatic growth in population here in Europe. This population growth, however, has called a new need for food and goods, and ideas for ways to increase production have been circulating since.
Our top story tonight centers on the emergence of an industrial revolution here in Britain. Now you might be wondering what exactly the Industrial Revolution is.
Although it's not a specific event, its origin earlier during the 1780s marks the beginning of an era that promises radical changes in agriculture, manufacturing, transportation, economic structure, and living standards.
One of our field reporters was fortunate enough to interview Vincent Brimble, a man who studied direct reasons why this industrial revolution originated in Britain in great detail earlier this week. We bring you the recorded footage now after a brief message from our sponsors.
Are you between the ages of 5 and 16?
Yeah!
Do you need money for your family?
Yeah!
Do you enjoy extensive manual labor?
Yeah! Wait, what?
Then you belong in the textile industry! Extensive hours, horrendous treatment, and terrible wages. For more information, call the number on your screen. Special terms and conditions may apply.
Good afternoon, Mr. Brimble, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Poppy. It's a pleasure to be here.
You're awfully famous here in England for your work regarding where, why, and how the Industrial Revolution saw its beginning. Is there any particular reason why you became interested in this field of study?
Nothing particularly predominant besides the fact that recent industrialization is a topic I find quite fascinating.
And now for the question we and our viewers are anxiously awaiting the answer to. Why do you believe that the Industrial Revolution originated here in Britain?
Well, Poppy, there is no quick answer to your question. As I'm sure you're aware, Britain is currently the most economically successful country in Europe. Not only do we have a large supply of raw materials, but we also have transportation for our products and a large market for them in colonies overseas. Any products that we don't use, we can ship to our colonial empire, and any that we need to transport within the country itself, we can cheaply ship on rivers or canals. Perhaps most importantly, unlike France and many other countries in Europe, we have no tariffs. Our endless supply of crops and low food prices also play an important role. Average British families don't have to sell their crops to buy bread, so they are able to spend more money buying manufactured goods, making the demand for goods within the country equal to the demand for goods from the colonies. Additionally, Britain's long-term constitutional monarchy is modern and stable. Our government accepts Adam Smith's ideas regarding the invisible hand and free market economies. Lastly, the Enlightenment created a larger educated workforce with more modern work views, as well as more agricultural laborers. Our population is not only steadily growing, but also willing to work.
So basically, economic, social, and political conditions here in Britain are perfect for industrialization.
Exactly.
Thank Thank you so much for joining us here at Channel 2 News this afternoon.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you, Poppy, for that interesting and informative interview.
In other news, our next story tonight regards what many consider to be the first decisive breakthrough of the Industrial Revolution, the creation of the first large factories in the British cotton textile industry. The big cotton mills marked the beginning of the Industrial Revolution.
Beginning several decades ago, during the 1760s, the limitations of the putting out system in the British textile industry began to outweigh its advantages.
A constant shortage of thread brought attention to coming up with improvements in spinning technology. Throughout the course of the next 20 years, three gifted men, James Hargreaves, Richard Arkwright, and Edmund Cartwright, made advancements in the British textile industry possible.
Last year, Channel 2 News was fortunate enough to have all three of the men on the early morning show. We bring you to that footage now.
Good morning, gentlemen. I'm Poppy Gibson. Thank you so much for joining us. This is James Hargreaves, Richard Arkwright, and Edmund Cartwright.
It is a pleasure to be here.
Likewise.
Both of your breakthroughs in the textile industry spurred a production explosion during the 1780s. More recently, in 1790, your machines were producing 10 times the amount of yarn that was being made in 1770. Now, gentlemen, if I'm not mistaken, you two invented your respective spinning machines almost simultaneously in 1765.
Yes, I was working as a carpenter and a jack of all trades, so to speak, when I invented my cotton spinning jenny. The jenny is simple and inexpensive. About 24 spindles are mounted on a sliding carriage, and they spin fine threads. It can also be run by just one woman, who simply has to move the carriage with one hand and turn a wheel for power with the other.
I invented the water frame around the same time. Although many believe some nonsense claim that I pirated it, I actually came up with the idea during my time between appointments. I used to be a barber, see. My water frame employs an entirely different principle than Mr. Hargreaves' spinning jenny, which allowed us to revolutionize all areas of production. With several hundred spindles, the water frame requires water power to run, and therefore was only originally used in large factories. It spins thick thread, which was later respun on hang-powered jennies.
Naturally, after our inventions were put widely into use, cotton goods became much cheaper, and all classes began to buy them.
Also, families in the cottage industry who used cotton no longer had to search for yarn because all the yarn they could ever need was spun on James's jenny or sent as the product of my water frame from large factories.
My dear friend has been a weaver for many years, and she told me that she feels prouder now than she ever did before. She even walks through the streets just like the middle class.
And Mr. Cartwright, you invented the power loom almost 2 decades later, correct?
Indeed, I wanted to save on labor costs since I saw the way that handloom weavers were being paid absurdly high wages. However, my power loom hasn't caused quite the revolution of the jenny or the water frame, and the ones currently in factories are working rather poorly.
Perhaps with time, young Edmund.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning, gentlemen. All of us here at Channel 2 News look forward to hearing about your progress in the future.
Although those advancements in the textile industry stimulated output and improved wages for weavers, the working conditions in early factories were worse than those of cottage weavers and spinners. Until recently, most factories were in rural areas where they had access to water power and many people refused to work in them.
My name is Abby Tyler. I've worked as a cottage weaver since I was a little girl, but outright refused to work in one of those new factories. They're just like those awful poorhouses where inmates labor without pay.
Because of the reactions of people like Abby Tyler, factory owners had to turn to young children for sources of labor. Most often young children who were either orphans or foundlings who had to be abandoned by their parents and left at local parishes.
Many parishes apprenticed foundlings to factory owners. It was a win-win situation for both parties. Parishes saved money and factories got workers who could be treated as slaves.
The children laboring in these factories were exploited terribly.
My mother left me at a parish when I was a baby. Although I spent the first years of my life there, my parish apprenticed me to Mr. Slaymaker, the owner of a large cotton mill just north of here, when I was only 5 years old. I worked for him for nearly 14 years and was only able to leave him just recently on my 18th birthday. While working at the factory, I didn't receive any wages, and my friends and I were locked up in the factory dormitories every night. We worked 13 hours a day, 6 days a week. The only reason I suffered through the terrible pain every day is because I knew that I would be beaten and abused if I didn't.
My name is Rory and I'm an orphan. When I was 8, I was taken from my home in the country by a man who said he would give me food, a place to live, and clothes. Instead, he took me to a coal mine where he forced me to work for at least 8 hours a day. We start working at 4 a.m. and we don't stop until 5 in the afternoon. I'm always very tired when I get home, and there's never any power to take a bath. But I'm too scared to stop working because I'm afraid that Mr. Blackwood will beat me.